weekly branch meeting. It's called Marxism in the Words of the Working Class. Often communist vocabulary have words that have been demonized by capitalist military intelligence agencies, or words that mean different things in different contexts. As soon as you say comrade, propaganda, or dictatorship of the proletariat, many people walk away angry without really knowing that they've been conditioned to distrust these terms and remain ignorant of other key concepts. Key Marxist vocabulary includes terms like bourgeoisie, who are the owners of the means of production, and proletariat, the working class who sell their labor. Other core concepts are class struggle, the conflict between these classes, surplus value, the profit generated by labor that goes to the owner, and means of production, the tools and materials used for production. The base, the economic structure, and superstructure, social, political, and cultural institutions, are also fundamental to Marxist theory. One term is economic and labor term is capital. One economic and labor term is capital. Wealth used to create more wealth through the exploitation of labor for private profit. People who take pride in working for a living and doing a job well often feel either disdain or longing for the practice of using money to make money without manual labor. But such a system is designed and destined to fall down inevitably and regularly due to inflation. Our bodies break down under the wear and tear of the pace set for us by cruel CEOs who treat us like machines that break down over time, simply factoring in our deaths and injuries as the cost of doing business. We are often told that the workers must seize the means of production. What are the means of production? The tools, the factories, and raw materials used to produce goods. I love to cook food and feed people, but I don't have access to or own a restaurant that I profit from directly. I barely get paid enough to pay the bills and come back to work, and often not even enough to do that, much less raise kids and support a family. I love to teach yoga and jiu-jitsu, but to practice these arts, but I don't own a gym, and I will never be able to afford one because my labor is exploited for the profit of big businesses. What is surplus value? The value that a worker creates beyond the value of their own labor, wages, which is appropriated by the capitalist as profit. I tell my coworkers about surplus value by explaining we generate enough profit for the company during the first half or less of our shift. And all of our wages for that rest of the day are paid in the first few hours of our shift. And all the supplies and the maintenance required for that business to operate. After that, all the profits from everything we sell or generate or maintain is stolen from us. What is wage labor? The system of workers selling their labor power as a commodity. One of my favorite quotes is that the slave is sold once for life, but the wage worker, the wage slave, sell themselves piece by piece every day. Our permission for this system is not genuine, but is manufactured at the point of a gun, on the point of hunger and homelessness, which often carry the threat of death at the hands of police violence or a desperate struggle against other unemployed workers on the streets. What is a commodity? A product created for exchange on the market. Workers are considered commodities by the bosses, as much as the meat and the produce and tools and the products that we produce. We are raised to think like slaves and to shun the concepts of socialism and Marxism as dangerous. It is by learning these concepts that we reclaim our humanity and become people again. What is commodity fetishism? It is the perception of the social relationships involved in production as relationships among objects, commodities, instead of between people. Again, the immediate reaction to terms like this are an example of how we are brainwashed to have a shallow and superficial understanding of our world. We are taught to view each other as objects and alienated from the fact that everything we see in stores and in society has a history of humanity, and so many people created that product. People who have families and stories. We are forced to compete with coworkers who we should be working together with and supporting as a community. These people are our neighbors. I've had negative interactions with coworkers who were being replaced by me or vice versa, and we both lost the job and ended up working together at another restaurant, only now we have a bad history. That makes no sense. Some social and historical terms. What is alienation? The worker's estrangement from their own work, the products of their labor, themselves, and other workers under capitalism. Often at work, people complain constantly because they don't work at a job they love or even like to do. As a result, they infect everyone with their bad attitude while doing a bad job and leaving a mess. When people can work jobs they enjoy, they find great pleasure in a job well done and focus on tiny details to make things very nice for everyone involved. And it's funny, I didn't write this down, but these are the kind of things that capitalists tell you about communism, that the workers there are lazy because they don't have to compete to survive. But that's them describing capitalism. If you've ever worked with somebody at a fast food place who really doesn't want to be there, you know what I mean. I tell coworkers, look, we've never met the people who created the ingredients that we serve for people, the farmer or the animals. We don't meet most of the truck drivers. We often don't even meet the customers. We can't afford to eat where we work, which is why most places offer employee meals to discourage hungry workers from stealing food. Our food at home isn't as nice as the food we serve others because we don't have nice kitchens to cook in, and we can't afford quality ingredients. If we had direct access to local farms, farmers, community kitchens, crops, and the people we feed, our daily task of feeding people would be so much more meaningful. Imagine going to a sentimental breakfast restaurant every day because that place is owned by the community and everyone gets free food there 24/7. This is possible, and it happens all over the world. What is dialectical materialism? Marx's theory that history is a process of conflict between material forces rather than ideas. We are raised on Bible stories and other mythologies. I remember when I was young and I discovered the Iliad and the Odyssey on a bookshelf next to me during a boring class in the 4th grade, and I suddenly realized these are all myths from different times and cultures, including the Christianity I was raised on. But the real factual history of the earth is hidden from us under certain regimes, and we must constantly fight for access to the truth. Evolution, archaeology, anthropology, and science are some of the most important fields, yet so many brilliant minds are wasted on religions. People were driven to fight over resources, and the myths that inspired them were just psychological tools of the ruling class of those times. This continues today, where people still believe in things like ghosts, angels, demons, and the afterlife. These are all related to the next concept. What is historical materialism? The theory that societies develop through distinct stages, such as primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and then communism, driven by changes in their economic base. It's important to give these terms to workers without confusing them with big words that can in turn alienate people from Marxism. When I joined the YPG International, I was an ignorant anarchist. And I remember listening to comrades and really trying to understand, but they kept using vocabulary that confused me. I literally said, wait, what the fuck is dialectical materialism? And one comrade told me, that just means talking about reality like we were doing right then. I said, well, why don't we just say that then? The YPG cadre explained to us that all slavery, including wage slavery, is based on the housewifization of women. The housewifization of women is based on animal husbandry. There's a reason they use these terms, housewife and animal husbandry. Animal husbandry, where cattle were kept inside structures like fences and city walls and bred for passive traits, as were human beings, while other people were bred for both violent tendencies and obedience, and those people were pressed into the police and armies, to keep the workers under control beneath the shadow of the pyramid-shaped temples of the false god kings and their priests who had overthrown the temple priestesses and matriarchs. Those women were then forced into the confines of the housewife. But the next stage of human evolution brings us to socialism and communism as we move beyond capitalist wage slavery. We are not the housewives of the ruling class. We are an enormous community of people with power and skill, and we demand respect, dignity, housing, healthcare, education, and safe and reliable transportation. It's worth noting that the Russian Revolution began on International Women's Day and was led by women. The Revolutionary Communists of America just released a very nice talk about this on the RCA YouTube channel, and I strongly recommend that you see it if you haven't already. For even more information on the subject of women leading the Russian Revolution, you can read or listen to Trotsky's book, History of the Russian Revolution. It's a very informative read, but also enjoyable. For some context, the Russian Tsar, the monarch, had sent most of the working men and farm horses away to World War I against the wishes of the people. Women were left to plow the fields to feed their children, having to carry and pull the plow themselves like horses. When food ran out, mobs of women flash mobbed the markets and stole what they needed to feed their children. People openly spoke about revolution. The Tsar called in the National Guard. The situation today is similar, with Trump deploying the National Guard while cutting off food stamps so he can consolidate resources for an unpopular invasion of Venezuela. Here is a quote from Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution. International Women's Day and meetings and actions were foreseen, but we did not imagine that this Women's Day would inaugurate the revolution. Revolutionary actions were foreseen, but without a specific date. The 23rd of February was International Women's Day. The social democratic circles intended to mark this day in a general manner, by meetings, speeches, and leaflets. Not a single organization called for strikes that day. On a side note, back then, the social democratic circles were communists, but the liberals today have hijacked that term. What is more, even a Bolshevik organization, and a most militant one, the Vyborg Boro Committee, all workers, was opposing strikes. On the following morning, however, in spite of all directives, the women textile workers in several factories went on strike and sent delegates to the metal workers with an appeal for support. Thus, the fact is, the February Revolution was begun from below, overcoming the resistance of its own revolutionary organizations. The initiative being taken of their own accord by the most oppressed and downtrodden part of the proletariat, the women textile workers, among them no doubt many soldiers' wives. Red banners appeared in different parts of the city, and inscriptions on them showed that the workers wanted bread, but neither autocracy nor war. A great role is played by women workers in relationship between workers and soldiers. They go up to the cordons more boldly than men, take hold of the rifles, beseech, almost command, "Put down your bayonets, join us." The soldiers are excited, ashamed, exchange anxious glances, and waver. Someone makes up his mind first, and the bayonets rise guiltily above the shoulders of the advancing crowd, so they were no longer pointing the bayonets into the bodies of the protesters. The barrier is opened. A joyous and grateful hurrah shakes the air. Everywhere, arguments, reproaches, appeals. The revolution makes another forward step. So what is Marxism? Marxism is a social, political, and economic philosophy developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels that analyzes the effects of capitalism on labor, productivity, and economic development. It's a theory of socialism that emphasizes the importance of economic factors in shaping human behavior and actions. So what does this mean to a working class person living paycheck to paycheck? What is social philosophy to a wage slave? As for socializing, we often only interact with coworkers day after day, and we must sacrifice sleep and precious free time to have a social life with family and friends. Politics are a seemingly abstract distraction when we must conserve calories for the workday. Thinking burns calories. The brain and the mind are physical things, not some abstract self in the ether that draws on some inexhaustible power source. One needs leisure time to engage in politics and philosophy. Many workers simply ignore elections because there isn't time to go vote. The democracy of capitalism is only a democracy for the ruling class, where the workers who do have time and energy to think about these things get to choose who will oppress them every 4 years. The two-party system ensures that the same right-wing death squad takes turns dressing up as good cop and bad cop. Both of them pull us over on the way to work and give us a ticket and a fine for $100 or $200 for trying to get to work on time. That fine cuts into our groceries when we live paycheck to paycheck. It is literally highway robbery. And that is a best case scenario where the interaction with police doesn't become deadly. To a worker, the economy is just something that always gets worse as the cost of living rises and our paychecks stay the same or even decrease. Employers cut hours in reaction to inflation and the rising cost of supplies. No one gets full-time hours, so no one gets benefits like health insurance, which shouldn't even be a benefit. That should just be something that everyone gets. We all look for a second or third job, and the first job complains that we aren't always on call to fill in for their schedule when an abused worker suddenly quits. We stand to lose our homes and more if we get injured at work or while speeding to work in a vehicle on the meat grinder that is American highways and roads, after trying to get as much sleep as we can to stay healthy while also spending time with loved ones and trying to enjoy life outside work. The stress of these factors makes workers irritable and aggressive as we are forced to compete with each other for resources and hours on the work schedules that are intentionally and artificially restricted by greedy companies so their CEOs can buy another sports car and another house, while we struggle to pay for rent on an apartment with all kinds of hazardous problems like mold, faulty wiring, and bad plumbing, all of which happen here in this apartment I'm in. And there is a plumber outside a month after I called my landlord for problems with the toilet. Here are some more concepts of Marxism. Class struggle. The driving force of history is the struggle between the bourgeoisie, capitalist class, and the proletariat, the working class. The bourgeoisie exploits and oppresses the proletariat. What is class struggle for the worker? We already mentioned several examples of how a worker faces exploitation. In the workplace, in the form of wage slavery and the theft of surplus, the loss of sleep, and the highway robbery by police in the form of excessive fines and too many laws, the isolation and alienation of workers who only have the time and energy to go to and from work and home and back again until we die. These forms of exploitation are disguised by wages, but landlords and business owners normalize these processes until they are unquestioningly accepted by workers worldwide. This is a form of psychological warfare. We are even made to think that becoming bougie is the goal. Even the term materialist becomes hijacked by capitalism to glorify a wage slave who identifies with their oppressor and imitates them. But the worker who becomes aware of these things through the struggle to survive and chance encounters with evangelical Marxists realizes that the class struggle is the battle of the workers against the bosses to reclaim the profits generated by the worker. We suddenly realize that we produce enough profits in the first half of our shift or less to cover our pay and the maintenance and supplies of our job. Everything after that is profits stolen from us. In Tallahassee, where I live, and probably other college towns, the local workers whose enslaved ancestors built the universities there are forced to work for the rich university students to provide luxury food and housing. But every summer and holiday, the students leave, and the workers lose hours and wages and are left to be evicted onto the streets. This has happened to me many times. Many students even get caught by the system themselves, its police, the drug trade, etc., and get stuck in college towns as wage slaves themselves, unable to escape. And on a side note from this essay I wrote, a lot of students get addicted to drugs because they're trying to keep up an inhuman pace of way too many classes, way too many assignments, way too many tests, and they get addicted to uppers. What are the economic base and the superstructure? Society's base is made up of its modes of production and exchange relationships, which heavily influence its superstructure. The superstructure includes religions, governments, cultures, and institutions. Workers call this the big picture. Abdullah Öcalan, one of the founders of the Marxist-Leninist terrorist organization, the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, famously said, "There is nothing more contemptible than a slave who is grateful for their enslavement." We say things like, "Money is the root of all evil," and "It is what it is." These first two statements are true, but the third is a mantra that the ruling class repeats to make us passive slaves who accept our enslavement. These pacifying mantras are the bread and butter of religions and governments. We find them in the military marching songs, where the working class is promised socialism in exchange for their organized violence against fellow workers in the world. But capitalism does not even keep these promises. A shallow culture of ignorant materialism is encouraged in place of the discussion of historical materialism and dialectical materialism. Religion is pushed at every turn to justify violence, and the wage slave the promise of a fictional afterlife in the event of a violent death for the profits of the capitalist. And for those of you who consider becoming police and soldiers, I was a soldier in the Army Airborne Infantry, and I can promise you that nobody, don't do that, buddy. My cats are running around in here. Nobody dies instantly from a headshot or otherwise. It takes 6 to 10 minutes to die if you get injured in combat or as a police officer who's going around oppressing the working class for the rulers. It's not glorious. No one takes it like a G. Everybody cries for their mother at the end. The young worker is threatened with homelessness, police violence, hunger, and humiliation on the one hand, and on the other hand is offered a false sense of security and a place in society if the worker will become a cop to protect the property of the capitalist in the imperial core, or if they become a stormtrooper to kill and die for the empire abroad. But look at any street corner in America, and you will find a homeless veteran holding a sign. I was one of these sad sights not long ago. The superstructure, the big picture, is an ugly image that does not keep its promises, and instead uses and abuses the workers, and even its own soldiers and police have no stability, despite the promises and lies of recruiters. What is the labor theory of value? All economic value comes from human labor. Everything we have comes from fellow workers. Farmers from all over the world cross borders to plant and harvest with the changing seasons. Construction workers build our homes and bring clean drinking water into them. Sex workers and lovers give joy and pleasure and create future generation of workers. Family members turn our houses into homes. Doctors and healers and caretakers make us healthy and help us recover and fight illness and injury. Artists and intellectual laborers help us think about higher things and how they make us feel. I could go on, but everything of value in society comes from the labor of the working class, and we can withhold all of that. But our valuable labor is stolen from us by capitalists who are stealing our leisure time so that they can have the spare time to think deeply about more clever ways to keep us more thoroughly enslaved. What is revolution? As technology improves, existing forms of production become obsolete and hinder progress, leading inevitably to regular social revolutions. Marx believed a worker revolution was needed to replace capitalism with communism. The average worker hears the term revolution and immediately wonders, how will they pay the bills if everyone is going on strike or riots or whatever they think a revolution is? Images of trench warfare come to mind. But through the fog of daily work fatigue, even the average worker can see the downward spiral of a business and a nation state, though many try to hide from these facts in distractions like video games, streaming, sports, social media, romantic relationships, and vehicle maintenance. Revolutions are like hurricanes, earthquakes, or tsunamis. We know these things inevitably happen due to material conditions. While we don't know exactly when or where these disasters will occur, society has systems in place to detect them, to prepare for them, and to offset the damage and prevent loss of life. We even have genius architecture designed to withstand the earthquakes, high water, and high winds. Except in times when capitalists build cheaply, at least when maniac politicians aren't cutting funding to these programs. But the moment it happens, it is too late to try to prepare. In the same way, the Revolutionary Communists of America and the Revolutionary Communists International have discovered that the best way to prepare for revolutions is to do so before they happen. We know these uprisings are inevitable forces of nature, so we recruit emergency response personnel to our ranks and even employ full-time cadres for this task. Cadre comes from the French word for form. It is a framework for professionals. In the military, it refers to drill sergeants who train recruits, though it can also mean a team of scientists or a band of insurgents. In emergency response organizations in the military, there is a basic structure of the team, which is 4 to 5 people. 2 teams make a squad, 4 squads make a platoon, 4 platoons make a company, 4 companies make a battalion. During a natural disaster, these emergency response people can be mobilized quickly and sent into a dangerous situation to perform a specific task. We are not training cadres to go into battle at this stage, but to go into universities and society and workplaces to recruit revolutionaries to prepare for the next inevitable revolution. What is the dictatorship of the proletariat? A transitional phase until a classless society is established. This term, the dictatorship of the proletariat, has been demonized to frighten the working class in democratic and capitalist countries. It's important to explain that the RCA and RCI are not Stalinists, and that we oppose individual figures becoming dictators. This term simply means that we will not allow the 1% of wealthy exploiters to have any positions of power. Only the workers will have seats on the democratically elected councils, which will make decisions, and who are voted on and rotated regularly at the threat of being fired and replaced at any moment. The wealthy oppressors will be repressed, and key industries will be nationalized. It simply means that workers will control the state, and as we transition to a stateless, classless society. I will conclude with one last question. What will communism look like? It is difficult to say, because all we know is our material conditions under capitalism, for those of us unfortunate enough to be born under that system. But Engels had this to say: that will be answered when a new generation has grown up, a generation of men who never in their lives have known what it is to buy a woman's surrender with money or any other social instrument of power, a generation of women who have never known what it is to give themselves to a man from any other considerations than real love, or to refuse to give themselves to their lover from fear of economic consequences. When these people are in the world, they will care precious little what anybody today thinks they ought to do, and they will make their own practice and their corresponding public opinion about the practice of each individual, and that will be the end of it.